Hello everyone, this is Ether Dragon, and welcome back to another episode of Fire Emblem Heroes. In this episode of the Damage Calc series, we'll be taking a look at dealt damage and a general idea of how to calculate damage with dealt damage in this game. So to preface the video, I do want to mention that basically everyone in the community calls dealt damage true damage. It's just kind of been the community convention ever since it was introduced. And well, as we'll see later in future episodes, it turns out there are ways to reduce dealt damage. So for the sake of proper terminology, I am calling it by its proper name, dealt damage. But just know that to the community, dealt damage and true damage are synonymous. Or even worse, if you say dealt damage, people might not even know what you're talking about. So chances are you're probably going to end up using true damage, but for the entire series and basically with whatever I do in my videos, I will call it dealt damage. And also for the sake of the series, since it has not been going as smoothly as I hoped it would, we'll be cramming all the information about dealt damage into one video. So without further ado, let's get started by talking about some sources of dealt damage. So for the most part, aside from mistranslations or incorrect descriptions, you can tell a skill grants dealt damage if it uses the word deals. And so to provide some examples here, we have Olivia with Wodow Plus here. So this weapon gives the unit 10 dealt damage whenever they proc their special. And there's other similar types. We have Dark Excalibur here on Sonya, and somewhat more recently Merrick. So that has the same effect. We also have Love Abounds Hector here with Wrath built into his weapon, Berserk Armads. And if you're not familiar with what Wrath is, for the purposes of this video, all you need to know is that when the unit is at or below 75% of their HP and they trigger their special, then they get 10 dealt damage. So all these earlier forms of dealt damage, mostly a set 10 damage, but as we'll see here, more towards the second and third years of the game, we've seen more dynamic methods of gaining dealt damage. And so Carla and Flying Nino have these weapons where they compare their speed stat with the enemy, and if they have more speed, then they can get up to 7 dealt damage per attack. So it's pretty decent, but of course we have the infamous legendary Alm, quite a more recent unit from a few months back, and he has Luna Arc, which gives him dealt damage equal to 25% of the foe's defense stat, which can definitely be pretty strong, and it scales with the enemy, so the more defense they have, the more dealt damage he gets out of Luna Arc in general. And I do want to mention there's other forms of dealt damage. We have Flashing Blade 4 and Heavy Blade 4 in the A slot. We also have Sen's Scale on Brave Alm, which gives him dealt damage based off of his attack stat, so that can be pretty strong as well. And Legendary Erica has Lunar Brace, which when she procs her special, she gets dealt damage equal to, I believe, 50% of the foe's defense. Could be wrong on that, but the general idea is there's quite a few forms of dealt damage, but the thing common to all of them is in their weapon or skill description. It says deals damage in some way. So there's that. And now we will move on to factoring in dealt damage in your damage calculations. And this is definitely quite a more challenging topic for people who are newer to damage calcs, because they don't typically see scenarios where understanding the actual mechanics matters, but we'll briefly summarize what we've covered so far in the first few episodes. So we have the attacking unit's attack stat, which can get modified by the weapon triangle, effective damage, and whatnot. And we have the foe's defense and res stats, which can be also modified via defense tiles, or as we'll cover in the next episode, specials that reduce the foe's defense or res stat. So altogether, you have your attacking unit's final attack stat, your defending unit's defense or res stat, whichever one's relevant, and then you subtract the defense or res stat from the attack, and now you get your super basic damage. This is the base damage that you'll see during combat, and then you have to factor in boosted damage specials like Draconic Aura. And these specials, they just simply add on to the current base damage. So now this is you could call it boosted base damage. There isn't a proper terminology for this from the game developers as far as I know. So we're just going to call it boosted base damage for this video. It's probably going to change later, but so at this point you have your boosted base damage. If it's a positive number, so it's like maybe you're at 30 or something, then everything's fine. Nothing too special changes. But if it's negative, it's at this point where you set it to 0. So if your unit's just completely not doing any damage, at this point it's just 0 damage. And so now at this point, it's not currently possible in the game to have boosted and damage multiplier specials proc at the same time. Not yet, at least. But after this, you then take that boosted base damage, and then you apply the damage multiplier specials. So specials like Glimmer or Astra, you multiply your boosted base damage by some amount. And now, at this point, is where you add in your dealt damage. This is what really trips up people a lot, for sure. I probably did not make it very clear, but if you rewind a couple times, if you're really trying to understand it, maybe it might be understandable. We'll definitely cover some examples in future episodes, but it is for that reason that even if your unit's doing 0 base damage, you can still do the full damage with dealt damage. So as a simple example, it doesn't matter, the numbers don't matter entirely too much, it's just a general idea. So say Olivia here with 44 attack, she were to attack an enemy with a blue lance armor, let's say, with 50 defense. So it doesn't really matter what Olivia's attack stat is going to be in this case. It doesn't matter. She's going to do 0 base damage. Well, let's just pretend her special was Glimmer, just to simplify things for this video. So her boosted base damage is 0. Glimmer multiplies that damage by 1.5, but it's 0, so she still does 0 damage. And at this point, it's technically actually negative damage. If you don't include Glimmer, but it's all 0. And now at this point you apply the dealt damage, and when she procs her special, she actually does 10 damage. It doesn't matter how low her attack stat is or how high the enemy's defense stat is, she's going to get that 10 dealt damage regardless, except for the exceptions we'll cover in future episodes. And this is pretty much why people call it true damage because for the most part you don't really encounter the scenarios that can reduce dealt damage. If a unit's just sitting on a defense tile, has an extremely high defense stat because of the defense tile, Olivia doesn't care when she procs her special, she's still gonna do that 10 dealt damage. So that's why dealt damage can be quite powerful. And well, I didn't really do justice to covering dealt damage in its entirety because it is a bit confusing to just verbalize it and not show numbers and stuff for people who are more visual. But that's going to be it for this episode. In the next episode, we will be covering defense modifiers. So in particular, we'll be covering defense tiles like these, and specials that can reduce the foe's defense or res stat like Luna or Moonbow, as you're probably pretty accustomed to, or even Ether. But until then, thanks for watching. As always, this is Ether Dragon, and hope to see you all next time. Bye!